today. So like Leanne said, my name's Nuzhat Uthmani. I'm an acting principal teacher in a Glasgow primary school in the South Side, but I'm also a mum. And I came into teaching actually later on in life. And this is a session actually I've been wanting to do for years. And the reason for that is when my son, my oldest, went into school and I got his primary one report, I didn't understand what's this, all this early first, second level, third level. And I couldn't understand why he was still at first level, because I thought, oh, surely he's brighter than that. He must be at third level. But of course, we have no understanding, you know, when we go back into the school system of, you know, what the curriculum is. And we don't understand the kind of how the progression works. So how am I supposed to kind of support my child through that? So I had a really wonderful head teacher at his school who actually sat down with me one afternoon after school, and he went through the whole curriculum with me. And I have to say, I think maybe that was an evening where it sparked my interest within education again. And, you know, and here I am years later as a teacher. So it's something I feel really strongly about, is to really help parents understand, look, what does the curriculum mean? What's all the jargon around it? How does that affect my child? What are the options available to my child, to my children? What's the kind of pathway they're going to follow? And ultimately, how can I best support them? So I'm hoping, you know, that's what we'll be able to do today. So if you give me a second, I will share my screen. Give me 1 minute. Right. Okay, so if Leanne, you can tell me, can you see that just now then?
Yep, that's fine. Okay,
fab. Right, okay, so here we are. So we're going to hopefully get started now. So the aim of the session, basically, well, apart from the aims I've already discussed, but this is what the kind of breakdown of tonight is going to look like. I'll talk about what we mean by Scotland's curriculum. You may have heard the term the 4 capacities within school or in school reports. We'll talk about what that is. Another thing that we talk about within schools in education here is the 4 contexts for learning. So I'll explain again what that means. Then the curriculum itself, you'll heard of, is known as the curriculum for excellence. That is broken down into the various subjects, all at different levels. And I'm going to go through that with you to hopefully really show you how each subject can progress as children move from early to primary to secondary, and you know what that means for your child's education. I will briefly talk about the senior phase. So obviously I'm a primary teaching specialist, but I'm very familiar with the senior phase. One, as a mum with my son going through it just now, he's doing his highers this year. Also, I sit on a number of government panels within education. So I've got a good few contacts that, you know, I have these conversations with. So hopefully I can give you some indication around what happens at that point. And then I'll just touch a little bit on beyond education, as in beyond the school gates, and when our children move on, you know, what's available at that point as well. So hopefully that will be helpful. Right, I wondered though, before we started, if you would help me out in understanding who you are and kind of where you are within your understanding of our curriculum in Scotland. So I've kind of displayed it as this windy road, because actually it's always changing as well. You will have heard of various changes that happen. The overall aims are generally the same, but there are a lot of different initiatives that come and go, and new changes and new developments. So it is quite a windy journey. So if you can score yourself then in the chat with regards to how confident you kind of feel about how much you know about your child's curriculum and what they're kind of going through in school. 1 being I was not confident at all, to 4 being, yeah, you know, I'm really confident, I fully understand it. So I'm just wondering if you can put your little score in your chat, in the chat function there. And I'm going to open my chat so I can see it as well. Okay. I'll maybe Leanne, I'll maybe let you actually tell me what roughly the scores are. Just, I don't think I should bring them up on the screen just for your recording, so it might be better.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, I mean, it's just me at the moment. So I've said that I'm a 3, because even with all my experience of running Glasgow City Parents Group and all the meetings I attend, I definitely still get very confused with some of it.
Yeah, and that's interesting because you are so engaged. And I wonder, Leanne, do you think that that might be because, again, a lot of the jargon related to education, from what you hear, do you feel that it's maybe not parent friendly enough, to kind of get parents on board, do you think?
Yeah, definitely a lot of it is down to the jargon and acronyms.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen a sector that has so many acronyms. And just to say as well, sorry folks, I think the chat was disabled. My apologies, I've just corrected the sentence. So sorry if
Okay.
you've been trying to do that. But that's hit available now if you want to put
Right,
your
brilliant.
score in.
Yeah, right. We'll give it a couple of seconds and see if we can get some responses. But I
But
think
yeah,
that's very true what you're saying.
Yeah. There we go. So we've got another 3, somebody saying that they've studied early years but could learn more.
Okay, good. Which is really good actually, because I started off in early years. So when I decided to change career, so I was in banking and finance at that point, and then I decided to come into education. I actually did the early years qualification first, worked in nurseries, and that's when I thought, you know what, I'm quite interested now in child development and how the education system works, and then went into primary. So yeah, that's a good place to start.
Catherine, it's okay if you can't see anybody else's chat, because we're calling out the numbers anyway. So if you just stick in what number you think you're at, that would be helpful. But yeah, it's just one other comment along with my own. So we're both sitting at 3 at the moment. I think it's quite similar.
Okay, that's not bad then. That's good.
Catherine's 2.
Okay. Brilliant.
Elaine says she's brand new to it. She's got a child going into P1, so she hasn't got a clue. Yeah.
Amazing. So you're going to get the most out of it then. Elaine, you're going to be set now for the rest of your child's education. But that's really good. Brilliant. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'm going to move on, and we'll come back to this maybe at the end of the session, and you can let me know if what you've heard today has helped you any. Okay. Right, so I'm going to throw this at you straight away. All these organizations are involved in our education system in Scotland. Some of them you will have heard of, obviously Scottish Government. You will have heard of Education Scotland. They are the national body that kind of house the curriculum, let's say, but they also provide a lot of training to teachers, and they do a lot of other work nationally in order to kind of help make improvements within the education system. They are currently going through a reform though. So that logo potentially and that name might change over the next couple of years as their kind of remit is slightly changing and it's being restructured. So that's news to come in the future. Who else you will have heard of? Let's see. You might have heard of GTC Scotland there on the right-hand side. So the General Teaching Council of Scotland is basically the regulatory body for us as teachers. We have to make sure that we are meeting certain standards every year, and this is relevant to every single teacher in Scotland. You have to be able to meet those standards in order to have registration in Scotland. An unregistered teacher in Scotland cannot teach, and whether that's in the public sector or the private sector. So the GCCS Scotland are very, very important in that sense. SQA might be another one if you've got older children. SQA is the Scottish Qualifications Authority. So they are the ones that basically make the exams. They are the ones that are responsible for the marking of the exams in the senior phase. So from 4th year, 5th year, 6th year, as well as kind of beyond that as well. So they are also part of the reform agenda just now alongside Education Scotland. So they may also change name and logo, and potentially how the exam system actually looks in the next couple of years may possibly change in terms of when exams happen or how often exams happen. So that's something that's happening in the background just now. What else? There's a few teaching unions. So if you've been following the pay campaign over the last few months, you may have heard of the EIS. EIS is the largest teaching union in Scotland. The SSTA at the bottom there are Secondary Teachers Association, NASUWT as well. or a teaching union. So there's a National Parent Forum of Scotland, of course, that do similar to obviously what Leanne has set up here with the Glasgow City Parents Group, but on a much more kind of larger scale on a national level. And there are a variety of partners there. So really they all link together. They are all working together in the background to help develop, sustain and maintain and keep going with our education system. There are, like I said, bits and pieces of changes and improvements that are happening in all of these, and everyone's contributing. But initially when you see all this, you think, oh my gosh, I don't know all of these. But I've pointed out, I think, the kind of main important ones there as well. There may be others as well, just to say that on this particular graphic. Right, okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about then is what is Scotland's curriculum. So the first thing to say is curriculum is not just the subjects that we teach or that our children are learning. The curriculum, when we talk about the curriculum, we talk about the entire experience that your child or your children are going to have within the school system. Obviously starting within early years, where there is a big focus on learning through play and exploratory learning and developing social skills. Within primary, again, we're looking at what other experiences can we include in and around the subjects that our children learn, whether that's extracurricular activities, whether it's outdoor learning, through school visits, through how a child's achievement is recognized, what events a school might put on. All these things form part of the curriculum, and then the same kind of idea within the secondary sector. So it's because as a nation, we want our children to achieve certain skills and develop into certain types of citizens, that are going to be progressive and happy citizens as well, and skillful and knowledgeable within the 21st century. So this is called Scotland's curriculum. So I mentioned the 4 capacities. Now, this term is used a lot within schools. There's been a big focus on this over the last few years since the Curriculum for Excellence was born. And you might see it displayed in schools. You might see it in your child's school reports mentioned all the time through achievements. So the 4 capacities are basic skills that we want our children to develop over their course of time within the education system. So the first one is we want them to be successful learners. And that means basically we want them to have achieved learning to a degree that is going to help them progress and achieve beyond the school system, right? They're successful learners. We want to ensure that they are confident individuals. So we want children and young people to be able to maybe do some public speaking. We want them to be able to maybe have confidence in performing various things. But very importantly, it's about being confident in yourself. And a lot of that you can link to things like having positive mental health, having positive relationships, friendships, other kind of relationships as they get older, relationships with their families. All these things develop a lot of confidence, right, in all of us. And so we want to make sure that we are providing experiences to our children, young people, then that is giving them those skills to be confident within themselves. You might have a child, for example, who doesn't like performing or who doesn't like public speaking, but they are still confident within themselves in their ability to, for example, take part in sport. Or they might be the more creative child who has full confidence in their ability to create amazing artwork or technology related things. So it's about how you develop confidence, but confidence is different for each individual as well. It's not about forcing every child, you must be able to take part in a debate, you must be able to lead a presentation. It's not about that. It's about where each child feels comfortable and can develop their confidence in that area. We want them to be effective contributors. So we do want children to come forward and take part and participate in the life of the school in general, to take part in various things that happen within their classroom and also then in their local community. So of course, that schools have always been heavily involved in their local communities, taking part in charity events, taking part at spring days, summer celebrations, big events, so we want children to be part of their community and to take part in that, but also to be able to take responsibilities within the school system. So it could be, you know, leading pupil groups. It could be about taking part in assemblies at school, you know, taking on the role of junior road safety officer, you know, things like that that the schools do provide. We want to make sure that they feel that they are part of their community, that their voice is heard as well, their opinions matter, and that they can contribute to making their world a kind of better place. And then that leads us on nicely to, of course, we want our children, young people to be responsible citizens. So I am a very big advocate of global citizenship and social justice. I do a lot of work around equalities and anti-racism and things like that. And responsible citizens for me is such a massive thing, because I know as a teacher, I feel I have that huge responsibility of having an influence on what future generations will be like, and what their understanding will be of world issues and local issues. So responsible citizens is really about understanding how the world works. And that includes challenges, you know, and understanding why the world is the way it is in some cases where it is unfair. And it's about gradually building that understanding of what each individual in our society has the power to do, and how collectively, obviously, we can come together to make positive changes. So these 4 areas, I hope you agree, you know, they're really good aims, but really we want to make sure that all the curriculum experiences, like I was saying, you know, are underpinned by this. They're helping our children to achieve one of these. Any questions there, Leanne? Is that clear, that part? I don't mind taking a quick question about capacities just now if you want.
There's nothing being submitted just now, so just
Okay.
remember, folks, if you want to submit a question, you can do so. Just go to your
Okay.
toolbar where you normally mute yourself, and there's the chat function, and there's also the Q&A button. So whichever version is easiest for you.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So then moving on from the 4 capacities, we have something called the 4 contexts for learning. I think as a parent, maybe you don't come across the 4 contexts as much as you would come across the 4 capacities. And I think the reason for that is that I feel the 4 contexts are more kind of catered towards us as educators and what we are offering to our children and young people. So the 4 contexts mean that, you know, how are we providing opportunities for personal achievement to be recognized in the school system? So, you know, a child goes to certain clubs, you know, how do we recognize that? Or, you know, they might be, for example, if, you know, we have young carers in our society, how do we acknowledge and value the skills that children bring from the outside into our school? There's the ethos and the life of the school as a community. So we were talking about that there, how schools have always been the heart of a community, but how do we really celebrate that? And how do we bring our outside community inside as well to really feel connected as a partnership and be part of that? Interdisciplinary, see, I can't even say it properly, interdisciplinary learning, it'll be one of these jargony terms, I guess. So that you might have maybe also heard of cross-curricular, which is like saying, well, I'm teaching one topic, but I'm using bits of maths and I'm using bits of literacy, reading and writing as part of that. I'm also maybe going to use some ICT for research. And then I'm also going to tie in some artwork to showcase what we've learned in that. So that's very kind of cross-curricular, which means, you know, we've used different subjects to teach the one thing, which is a great way of doing it. Interdisciplinary learning is slightly different in the sense that it's more inquiry-based, it's more research-based for our children. So we want them to think of the big questions around a particular topic, and then we explore what you know the learning is behind that big question. And so even though you do then cover lots of different subject areas, you can within that area, it makes it slightly more richer and more in-depth and really a lot more interesting for children and young people if they're exploring a question that they have and a question that they've come up with kind of collectively, let's say as a class. And so you are still ticking off the different subjects, but you're doing it in such a more of a kind of rich, more meaningful way. I do a lot of interdisciplinary learning, and sometimes you'll hear a bit mentioned as IDL. You might see in reports as IDL. So I do a lot of IDL, and it's so much more interesting to teach that way as well, where you're really trying to encourage children and young people to be critical thinkers and to ask questions and to think deeper and to make links between this is like this because of that. Oh, right. So then therefore that means this. And that's a kind of process that we want all children and young people to follow kind of through their life as they're learning. The one challenge, though, I would say with this is that you will see a lot more of this within the early years sector because there's such flexibility there, and also within the primary sector. But what happens is as you start to move into the secondary sector, because of the way our exam system is and the requirements are, that ability and that flexibility of IDL learning starts to narrow, because now you need to learn specifically. Let's say you specifically are learning, you're doing higher English, so you're specifically looking at higher English, and it's a lot more challenging then to see how you link that in with other subjects when you know you have an exam to prepare for. So we'll come back onto that. So it's not impossible, but it is a little bit more challenging. The important thing to say, though, is that if we've had a good base of IDL learning in early years and in primary, then I would hope that our children and young people have developed really good skills of questioning, critical thinking, research. So they've already got some really good skills there as a foundation to then take them on to that senior phase and apply then, those skills within the exam kind of process. And the last one there then is, of course, just the subjects themselves and what it is we're learning. But I want to go into this a little bit more deeply. Like I said, I do a lot of work around equalities, and there is a really important push just now, I would say, on trying to focus more on equalities and social justice within our school system. So even when you look at these four contexts for learning, it's important to also consider, and I often share this slide. I do a lot of training as well for fellow teachers, and I share this as a kind of tool for teachers to think about what they're doing and how they're providing this. But I want you to think about it as a parent and think about your child just now. Being from a minority ethnic background, my children's obviously ethnicity and their identity is hugely important. So I want you to think about what you would want valued in your school for your child or for your children. So in that sense, what I put together was, well, their sense of identity is hugely important, and valuing what all the different backgrounds that our children and young people come from and the lived experience they bring is really important. So how then in the school system should that be valued and recognized? And I can tell you, when I was young, growing up, I grew up in Liverpool and I moved to Glasgow here when I was 12. So I did all my primary education in Liverpool. But even through primary or secondary, I had very much my cultural side, which was at home. It was never in school, the two never mixed. Yet, it was such a big part of my identity. And I really want children and young people like me who are growing up today to not have to feel they have to hide that because it makes them uncomfortable, or it's going to, cause some kind of resentment or whatever. And sadly, these things happen. So for me, it's really important within the school system to let children bring all their identity, to the school, because it enriches us, it enriches our knowledge and our learning. So how is your child's identity and lived experience being valued within the school system? You want to talk about, you want to share those opportunities of achievement that they're achieving outside with the school to make sure they value that. Ethos and life of the school, again, what is important to a school? Are they only doing events because, well, that's what we've always done? Or are they taking into consideration maybe our school demographic has changed, maybe our community priorities have changed? So are they changing along with those times? And you as a parent have absolutely every right to speak to your school to say, I would like to see more events around this or more events around that. This is important to our family, or this is important to a group of families. So I've got in there standalone events. So I have a slight issue with things like the one-off Learning for Sustainability Week, where we all talk about saving the environment, but then there's not enough for the rest of the year on that focus. Or things like Black History Month, where we celebrate it just for 1 month and then we just don't talk about all the contributions around the world of people from different backgrounds in our society. So it's about things like that. But as a parent, you do have the power to say to your schools, you know, I'd like to see more of this, because this is more relevant to us as a community or to us as a family. So get involved in that sense. Coming back to the interdisciplinary learning. So again, we need to consider our schools, we need to consider, again, because society is always changing, our priorities are changing, our people are changing. So we need to think about, you know, why do we teach what we teach, and whose perspective is dominant in that, and whose perspective is missing. So if you feel, you know, that your sense of identity or your background or your certain needs are not valued enough within the school system, you don't see examples of that in your child's learning, then again, you know, you can approach your school and say, well, I'd like to see a bit more representation of this or a bit more representation of that. How can that be arranged so that we're not always kind of pushing the dominant perspective? So as a simple example of that, you know, a lot of our children's reading books, I'll give you an interesting fact. It's a sad fact, but it's an interesting fact in the sense that there are more animals as main characters in children's books than there are people of color or people with disabilities. And, you know, we all like to use animals as it's fun and it's cute, and children do love it, you know, and they can identify and they learn lots of things. But it really is a sad reality when so many of our children then don't see themselves reflected in stories and as main characters, and that is changing. There are lots more storybooks now being written, one by people from different backgrounds, but about people from different backgrounds, where the main character also is either someone with a disability, somebody maybe who is LGBT, and somebody who maybe, you know, is a Muslim girl who wears a hijab, or you know, or any other kind of background. So there are a lot more books out there like that, and we want to encourage schools to refresh their libraries and their teaching, and not always sticking to that same text that we do every year in primary 7 or whatever. And then just again, coming back to just our general subjects and our topics, our curriculum areas, you know, I would suggest are good, they're broad, and I'll go over them for you in a minute. But what we teach within them, again, the curriculum we have in Scotland is not very fixed in that way. We as teachers, as schools, have the flexibility to actually choose what topics we want to do. So again, we need to look at our school communities, think about our priorities in society, and think, well, you know, how can I make this more representative? How can it be more meaningful for the children I have in front of me? I want our children to learn more about, let's say, you know, discrimination around LGBT or discrimination around disabilities. So what kind of topic can I use that promotes that understanding? So we do have that flexibility. And again, you as a parent body absolutely can raise these questions with your schools as well. Okay. Is that okay, Leanne? Anything else? Shall I move on? I know that was a bit heavy.
We've got a couple of questions if you wanted me to go ahead, because I think it's more relevant to this slide. So first one says, I believe the BGE extends to the end of S3. Should there be scope for IDL before the beginning of the senior phase?
So like I said, that is when definitely the scope is. It's when the senior phase starts that it seems to compress a bit more, because then you're preparing for exams. But up till, you know, all the way through primary, we have plenty of opportunity to be doing IDL, and it does get tighter though when they get to secondary and your S1, S2, S3, because your subjects obviously separate out a lot more. Like, and I'm going to come on to what happens there. But also then you have a different teacher for each subject. And in primary, you have the one teacher, so it's much easier for that teacher to, you know, create her curriculum every day, every week, or his curriculum, I should say. But in secondary, then you've got so many other people involved just within that one child's learning. So it's that bit more challenging. I mean, I would suggest though that you can still do it, but again, it just means a lot more time to plan that, and maybe a bit more partnership within different departments to make that happen. Another one, Leanne?
Yeah, and just to confirm for anybody that's listening, which I should have done the first time round, the BGE stands for Broad General Education, in case that wasn't already picked up, because I was saying there's so many.
Yeah, I'm coming to that.
and education. So just to kind of track back on my own criticism. Second one, do the levels of the curriculum make it harder to diagnose additional support needs? So do they make it harder to pick up or diagnose? Because I think it's because, you know, how sometimes kids can sit on level 1 for quite some time. And so maybe if you as a parent have a concern around your child's learning and them maybe not advancing the way you think they would, do you think that the curriculum makes it harder to pick that up?
Okay, I don't think the curriculum makes that harder. But I think we'll come back to that one, Leanne, once I go through the stages. Yeah. Just so we can clarify what those stages are and the levels are, and then we can come back to that one if that's okay then.
Sure, that's fine.
Because it'll be easier to explain once we've talked about that, I think then. Right then, so we move on. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's us.
Okay, well, here we are then. So the curriculum for excellence is the name basically of our education kind of system, or the curriculum that we follow. It is from age 3 specifically up to around, well, obviously it goes up to the senior phase, but what we just talked about there, broad general education, is pretty much up to the end of S3. And what that means, broad general education, is that you basically learn everything. You learn a huge variety of subjects. They're not optional. Everyone does all those subjects across all those years. The specific topics that your child will learn, though, again, is down to your school. It can be down to an individual teacher. We have the flexibility of doing that. The curriculum itself sets out certain what we call outcomes. So we want a child to be able to, for example, I'm going to go through some examples later as well, but for example, we want a child to be able to recognize notes, different notes and points, right? That would be an outcome when it comes to money and maths. So we have different outcomes, but as in the outcomes are fixed, but we as teachers have the flexibility of teaching it whatever way we feel suitable, especially for the children in front of us. And that's something that will change every year. We don't teach from the book. So it's, and I do sometimes feel that a lot of people still think that, you know, we start up at 9 o'clock and we open the textbook and go, right, everyone, let's start on page 1, and we just work through. It's not like that at all anymore. Every single lesson is planned individually according to the children you have in your class. So that means even if you have been a primary 7 teacher for 5 years, every year you would have had to change your lessons because it's based on the children in front of you and their needs and all the other different things that I was talking about there earlier. But so broad general education then does mean, however, the subjects that we study at that point are across many different areas, and I'll share those areas with you. When you come to the end of S3, then you're looking at moving into the more kind of qualifications-based learning. So at that point is when, at the end of S2, your child will pick less subjects that they would then study in S3 and S4, with the aim of sitting a final exam in S4. That's our national 5s. I will come back to that though. And then beyond that, you're looking at your higher. So I'll come back to that bit. But the important thing to know, and this is where I was totally confused when I got that first that first report in primary 1 for my son. So this is the kind of important thing to understand. So from age 3, which is the kind of preschool era, all the way to roughly the end of primary 1, that's called the early level. After the early level, between primary 2 and the end of primary 4, you're on the first level, right? So you're always on that first level between that time. And then from primary 5 to around the end of primary 7, you're on second level. And the reason I'm saying around the end for each year is because it will be different for every child. And what in a school, as teachers, when we are kind of tracking progress, we talk about whether or not a child is on track or not. And being on track means that they are expected to complete first level by the end of primary 4, right? If we think, well, they might complete it actually in the first few months of primary 5, And that's, that's generally okay as well, because it's a kind of average. If, however, we feel that they're going to be in primary 6 and they're still not going to have really achieved first level in their skills and their understanding of a particular subject, then we would say they're not on track. And that's where obviously interventions are important. So we are continuously through the year tracking all our children to see where they are in terms of achieving that level and the required level that they are on, according to the year group they're in and their age. And if we feel that, they look like they're not going to be meeting that, for whatever the reason is, whether it's an additional support need, there may have been other issues, it's important then for us to then start to look at ways to support, to add supports. And when we talk about interventions, that's basically what it is. Well, what can we do here to make sure that this gap doesn't get bigger, or to help them, give them a boost and move them on. And so that those conversations are happening all the time at every level. And then coming back to S1 and S3, S1 to S3, so that continues into the 3rd and the 4th level. 3rd level, you should be done by S1 and end of S1, finish 4th level by the end of S2, ideally, for most people. And so that S3, you're starting your National 5 kind of curriculum, which you would then finish in S4. S5, you can do your hires. S6, you can do hires and advanced hires. I'll come back to senior phase later. So that's the important part there with regards to early, 1st and 2nd. So in terms of curricular areas, so the curriculum for excellence is basically split into 8 key subject areas, or 8 categories, I should say, actually. Right, so it's split into 8 categories. You've got literacy and English, numeracy and maths, we've got health and well-being, science, oops, sorry, ignore that. And I'll come on to the next 4 as well. But what I wanted to show you here first is how this then progresses as your child was to move on to secondary. So literacy and English within the kind of early and primary sector especially, we're looking at obviously developing reading skills, writing skills, and talking and listening. And that's what TNL is. Talking and listening is very important in the sense that it's about, for example, if I am showing a video, an information video to children, probably at least from P5 upwards, and I want them to take notes, that comes under the kind of listening. How well can they listen and take the important points down at the same time? It can also be about what skills does the child have in being able to wait their turn to talk or to have a debate, not an argument, but to have a debate or have a discussion. How well do they cope in that kind of environment? That's developing the kind of talking and listening side, as well as, developing public speaking and things like that, and sharing ideas. It doesn't even have to be like a presentation, but how engaged are they in sharing their own ideas or responding to other people's ideas as well. So all those skills together, when you move into secondary school, then that will become English, core English as a subject, where you continue to develop those skills, but also we connect modern languages at that point. The dominant modern language, of course, that we learn generally in Scotland is French. There are schools, though, that provide other languages. I know Urdu is done in some, German is done, Spanish is done, Mandarin is being done in a number of schools as well now. So it depends on your kind of school community and what their kind of dominant language is. That language generally will be compulsory until the end of S4. So that's something you would expected to carry on to do. And like English as well, English is also compulsory all the way from S1 to S4 at least. Coming into numeracy and maths. So again, numeracy and maths, the reason I like numeracy and maths is that there is number related work in maths. So that's when you're doing your times tables, what we call the 4 operations, adding, subtracting, taking away, oh no, I said that, adding, subtracting, multiplication and division, as well as, things like kind of percentages but your mathematics side is more the kind of slightly non-numeracy side, things like developing your understanding of shape, measure, time, data handling, looking at statistics, that kind of thing. So within early years and primary, we are focusing on all of those under one umbrella, although it's split into different categories, and I'm going to show you that. But when you move on to secondary, that becomes your core mathematics. Again, that's compulsory alongside English and a language up till the end of S4. But then you can go on to, there's also, it's kind of broken down sometimes in some schools, it can be maths, or you could do applied maths, which is slightly different as well. Not all schools offer the difference, and you would have to kind of check within your own secondary school. But that's what that would progress onto there. Then you've got so health and well-being, and we do talk about within the curriculum, literacy, maths, and health and well-being should be the kind of core of everything that we're teaching. So, you know, we should be using aspects of those in across all the subjects that we're teaching as well. So in health and well-being, then move that within the primary sector, you're looking at social well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being. And as you move into secondary, then that's broken up a bit more specifically. So you've got PE. PE, I believe, is compulsory all the way through secondary school, I'm pretty sure, because I know my son is still doing PE in 5th year. So there is, I think it's a kind of government guideline that all children, young people should get at least 2 hours of PE every week. So that continues all the way through. Although you can do a qualification in PE when it comes to 4th year, and you can do higher PE as well as a qualification. Even if you're not doing as a qualification, you still have to do your 2 hours of PE. Another thing then that health and well-being is delivered through in secondary is called PSHE. Some schools have a slightly different name for it, but it's basically personal kind of development and health education. So they will learn things like relationship education. They will learn things about substance misuse. They may also do things around sustainability and being a responsible citizen, how you can help in your community, things like that. RSHP is, you may have heard of it, is relationship, sexual health and parenthood. So that starts from the very beginning of the curriculum, and it progresses as the stages go in terms of the detail, but is delivered at every year. And again, it's delivered through secondary as well. And then the home economics I've put in there because you're looking at the kind of the health nutrition side of things, and developing your own kind of skills kind of come under that umbrella as well. Science, of course, is taught within the primary sector. It's taught as just one big umbrella of science. But within science, you know, we might be teaching a topic that's more related to biology, or a topic that's more related to physics. So for example, if we teach about electricity in the primary school, then that's you developing your physics knowledge. And when we talk about living things and biodiversity, and the human body is always very popular in primary school, you know, that's us developing our kind of foundation for biology. So in the secondary sector, then science is split. Some schools do still teach the 3 sciences under the one umbrella of science in S1 and S2. But when you then go on to choose your subjects from S3 onwards, then you're looking at the individual sciences. Again, it's different though from school to school. Some schools will let you do all 3 sciences at S4 level. Some will let you do 2, and some will only let you do 1. Usually the reason for that is staffing. I don't know if you are aware, there is quite a major crisis within the education system currently about hiring enough what we call STEM teachers. So STEM, again, another acronym, is science, technology, engineering, and maths. So we're struggling to have enough teachers specifically for maths and chemistry, biology, physics. So that's something that, you know, we have a big national push on. So it can really differ, unfortunately, from school to school. And the best way to find that out is, of course, to ask your school as well. Right, so the other 4 aspects of the curriculum then, we've got technologies, religious and moral education, expressive arts, and social studies. So again, technologies within the primary sector is to do with craft building things. It could be to do with computing and ICT and developing that side of things. Within the secondary sector, oh, what's my mouse? Within the secondary sector, then that again is broken up into computing, actual computing studies, graphic communications, as well later on through the secondary sector. Woodwork and metalwork, children S1 and S2 get to start to do things like that. And again, home economics, because they do kind of sewing and a lot of building things and creating things within there as well. RE, what we used to call RE when we were at school within Scotland, is religious and moral education, because it's not just about the teaching of religion. Religion is very much taught now from the lens of morality as well. And, you know, how can you identify with this in your life, even though you may not follow that particular faith or any faith, but how can you take the messages of the different faiths and apply them to your life as well? Where is the relevance? How is it meaningful? I've clearly written maths under there by mistake, so that's a mistake on my part. I don't know why that says that. So it should basically just be that within secondary school, though, it is still called RE. It goes back to being called RE, but they do have the similar conversations. And RE is also compulsory, I believe, till S4 as well. Okay, so then arts. Within arts, even within the primary sector, the expressive arts curriculum is divided into these things, and these then become subjects that your children, young people can take in secondary school. So art and design, of course, is more the kind of drawing aspect, but also creating things. That can also then actually later on become things like fashion as well. Some of the schools offer that as well, or they can specialize in that if they're doing their higher, if that's what they're interested in. Music, drama, and dance as well. So these are all qualifications that you can go on to take. Social studies, big one, normally the one where all the fun topics are, you know, that children like to do within their primary kind of journey, the Romans and the Victorians and World War II and all that kind of stuff that they enjoy doing. That then becomes more specific. So social studies houses your history, your geography, your modern studies, and also business within its umbrella. And all of these, again, can be taken as separate subjects from S3 onwards. Although, I should say history and geography you would get separately in S1, and business as well. Modern studies for most schools happens from S3 onwards, which is more your kind of politics side of things, and you know, kind of international global studies of, you know, why the world is the way it is. Very interestingly. Right, everyone okay there, Leanne? Just before I go through an example.
Yep, no more questions at the moment. So just remember, folks, that you can submit your questions through the chat and the Q&A button.
Thanks. Okay, so I thought I'd give you a little flavor of what that progression looks like then, right? So I've used money because generally, you know, we're all kind of familiar with money, and it's something that we're using all the time. And quite a lot of people will have discussions with their children, especially when they're young, around notes and coins and going to the shops and things like that. So I think money is a good example. So this is a document basically which we as teachers follow. These are the outcomes that I was referring to earlier. Now, this is all publicly available. It's not that it's just teachers have this. So if you were to Google experiences and outcomes on Education Scotland, you will get the whole file for each subject, for each of those curricular areas that I shared with you just now. And all of the categories for each subject are listed. And these columns basically show the outcomes that we want to teach. We want our children to learn in this particular category according to the level that they are on. So if we start in the early years, so remember early years is nursery up to around the end of primary 1. I'm developing my awareness of how money is used and can recognize and use a range of coins. So recognize, I think it's slightly challenging. I think in my experience, not every 5-year-old will be able to straight away identify the difference between a 20p coin and a 50p coin, or a 10p or a 5p. But we're starting to develop an understanding of what money is and what we do with it. Not necessarily understanding the quantity of money. You know, they won't at that stage understand that £1 is 100 pence, but they'll understand that I can use this to go to a shop and buy something. And that's the kind of thing. So there'll be a lot more, there's a lot of role play and a lot of kind of discussion around that. What do you want to buy? And you know, have you got the money for it? And it'll be that kind of input that they would get lots of practice in that sense. Then you're moving up to first level, where it's that little bit more detail. So now I can use money to pay for items and work out how much change. So remember, by the end of first level, which is around the end of primary 4, you ideally want to be able to recognize all the different coins, the difference between notes and coins, be able to understand then that £1 means it has 100 pence, be able to do small change exchanges. So if this is £1 and I give you 50 pence, how much should you get back? So again, there's a lot of role play in that. There's a lot of counting, adding, taking away practice that would go alongside that, you know, to develop that understanding. Moving up to second level, then now it's a little bit more detailed. It's that little bit more complicated. You need to have that understanding though of how many 10 pence is in a pound, how many 10 pounds in 50 pounds, you know, that kind of thing. So you should have developed that understanding by the time you come to second level. And then it's about looking at different items, and you're starting to see, well, which one is better value, which is more expensive, which is less expensive. You might maybe do something like planning a party, and I might say to my class, right, you've got £50 to spend, you can't go over that, but you need to make sure that you have a cake, you need to pay for an entertainer, and whatever money's left, then you can get decorations or something like that. And I'd give them a task like that, and they have to be able to work out, you know, how they would budget for that. So you can see the kind of progression there. And then moving into secondary school, into the kind of third and fourth level. So again, we're looking at around about the end of S2. Then it's a bit more specific. You should be able to look at different offers and work out, this is better value for money, or that's better value for money. For example, I can buy this in bulk and it's actually cheaper per item than buying single items, that kind of thing. And you want to develop that kind of level of depth in their understanding, but also encouraging the idea of saving and budgeting. Or I'm saving for this, or how many weeks or how many months do I need to save for this thing to make it responsible. We'll also start to look at things like credit and the kind of advantages and the disadvantages. And we will have looked at things like percentages. So these things link together. Percentages and decimals is a separate category, but you can see how it obviously clearly links to the use of money as well, and budgeting and the cost of things. So all of that will be coming through at the same time. I'm wondering, Leanne, is that helpful to kind of map out how that area kind of develops?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I do have a question that's come in, actually, because I asked the rest of my group, did they have any questions that they wanted to put forward tonight? So we've got one in from them. And the question is that, I suppose this is quite a topical conversation that we get often, where do you think that the curriculum is weighted too heavily towards an academic pathway rather than other pathways?
I would say yes. And I think the reason for that is because we have this exam system at the end. And I think that's why it is. There has been a lot of work done over the years to provide a lot more vocational opportunities. There are a lot more vocational courses out there as well beyond school. And that whole idea of IDL that I was talking about earlier is very much about that as well. So for me as a teacher, you know, I'll have children in my class who are fantastic writers, let's say, and they can articulate everything they're thinking and all their ideas in amazing writing. However, there will also be children who are not at that level of writing, but they can create the most amazing poster because they're arty, they can speak about it forever, articulate it really well through speaking, and not necessarily through writing. So it's about recognizing the strengths of our individual children and young people. And for us as teachers, we have to then provide them that ability to showcase their learning in a way that suits them. Again, it becomes that bit harder when you're moving into the secondary phase. So I know as part of the discussion just now that's going on in the background with regards to reform, there is a suggestion coming out that is going to look at more different pathways and that are recognizing children for the different ways they learn or showcase their learning. So to move away from the heavy reliance on that end of year exam or end of course exam, but build more of a kind of portfolio of success that children, young people can start to build for them, and so that they still come away with something that recognizes their achievement. So to answer the question, yes, it is heavily more to the academic side, but there is work going on, and there is flexibility to some extent, at least within primary, where we can start to assess and recognize our children's learning in a different way, in a more flexible way.
Yeah, I think you raised a good point there about the fact that it's obviously geared towards the exam, and we certainly did raise with Louise Hayward in the education reform kind of conversations that things like volunteering and after school activities should carry some weight as well, because there's a lot of achievement within that. So thank you.
And there's things like, you know, Duke of Edinburgh. So Duke of Edinburgh means that you can get involved in voluntary things, and you get recognized for that. But even there, if we come back to things like equality, a lot of activities that children and young people might get involved in for Duke of Edinburgh aren't necessarily available to everyone. You know, there will be groups and communities that can't engage with that. So we have to make sure that there are other ways then to recognize what's important to them, like we've been saying, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really important to keep having that discussion with the review as well, and getting these points across. Okie dokie. Right, so just very quickly, because actually time is whizzing on, very quickly, I was going to go over this as well, just to show you as a different subject. So, you know, like I said, I have a big thing for global citizenship and social justice. So the social studies curriculum is really important for me, because I just think it's very much about what kind of society do we want now, but in the future, and what kind of, you know, our children are going to be the adults of tomorrow. So what kind of values do we want them to have? So this was an example of kind of within the early years, understanding that, you know, hold on, where is it? I am aware that different types of evidence can help me find out. So understanding the world around them, looking at different examples, being exposed to different languages, different cultures, different types of clothes, different types of food, all of that, you know, we can experience within the early years stages, within nursery, within primary one. That goes on to then understanding a bit more about what the society around you is like, what are the needs within, what are wants and needs, what's the difference here. And that's very much about starting to recognize that, you know, I have something that maybe other people don't have, and what does that mean? Or it might be, you know, that I don't have what some other people have, and, you know, what's the importance of that. And then again, when you come into second level, then you're really starting to develop the critical thinking aspect, and you're asking and you're questioning. And I would suggest you should be watching the news and things like that, and really understanding what's going on around the world locally, and, you know, in a global context, and trying to understand your place as an individual in that, you know, what can you do, and that sense of activism. I'm going to raise money, I'm going to make a poster, I'm going to go out and speak to people, I'm going to take part in debates, things like that. We want to start to develop that knowledge that way. And then secondary again, because then you're specifically doing subjects like modern studies or history and geography, and again you're understanding, you know, how has history got a part to play in this, you know, why are there certain communities, certain groups of people that have always been disadvantaged, and what's happening now, and how can we help that. So I just wanted to go through that example quickly as well, just to show you really how the kind of learning develops. It's all within the same topic, but it's how the learning kind of deepens as you go along. And what I really wanted to suggest, you know, as parents though, is about how to kind of help your young people. So when it comes to maths, and I think in terms of money, a lot of people do this, but it is really important to have discussions about money with your children. It's not necessarily about telling them about your particular financial circumstances, but it's important to have that discussion. It's important to take them shopping and point out that's been discounted. What does that mean? How much more is that? Which one should we buy? It's you know, it's about continuously having those conversations at home. You know, and it's the same across different aspects of maths, like time, and where do you see the time, the different ways time is displayed, and what does that mean? In the very early stages, time is really tricky for young people to understand. What an hour is really, really difficult. But if you're always having conversations and you're always pointing things out in your daily life, it becomes a lot more easier for our children, young people. And that absolutely, that foundation is so important in the early years in the primary sector. to give them the skills they need to move on to secondary. And in the same way, in terms of social issues, I would, encourage you to have conversations around things that are in the news, various, different aspects you see in society. It's really important to help develop those skills. So I said I'd quickly just touch on the senior phase. We talked about the SQA. So they, for now, are responsible for making these exams, but they are undergoing this big reform agenda for the time being. And it could be that actually you move away. I know one of the recommendations is to move away from the S4 exams. So they're the National 5 exams. You'll also maybe have heard of National 4s. So National 4 is a kind of certificate almost of completing a particular subject if the child or the young person wasn't going to be able to complete it at the level required for National 5. And if your child or young person is in kind of S3, from S3 onwards, the school would be able to assess whether or not they are going to manage to achieve National 5. So you would know at that point. But again, it's about interventions and helping them and putting the support in place to see if they can achieve that examination. So the National 5s are what we used to have as the equivalent of standard grade, and before that it was the O grade. Children, young people can then leave school after completing S4, but ideally, of course, we want them to stay to get, build more knowledge, build more skills, and achieve a few more qualifications. So when you move into S5, you do your hires. Lots of people sometimes also get confused. Obviously, I have colleagues in England as well. So hires are kind of slightly lower than what the A level is in England, and the A level lasts 2 years in England. The higher lasts a year. But what we do have is then the following year, you can do an advanced hire. And advanced hires actually sit above A levels in terms of the kind of rigor and the depth of knowledge. Depending on if your child is wanting to go to university, advanced hires are not necessarily compulsory. And generally, unis will ask for this many, no more than 5 hires of a particular grade. When I went to uni, they specifically said you must have an A in maths, or you must have a B in English, but they don't do that anymore. They now just basically say we need 5 A's to get into this particular degree, or we need 4 B's and a C, whatever. But now they tend to just tell you the grades that you need for your hires. There are some courses, things like medicine, I believe, do ask for advanced hire in addition to the hire of things like chemistry and biology. The other thing, of course, is we were talking about there then the kind of vocational courses. So vocational courses are more kind of hands-on courses where you're kind of tutored through various things. It could be engineering based, it could be accountancy based, it could be within a kind of building environment. Whatever your kind of interest is, there are also vocational courses available. Some of those you can do from your school, in the sense that your school would arrange transport between colleges and the school to arrange that, include that in your child's timetable within school, so you can go off campus basically to go and do vocational courses. There are things like apprenticeships now as well. So if you were to leave school at S4, you could go on to work for an organization and build more qualifications while you're doing the work. You would get paid, the apprenticeship salary, whatever that might be. But over a couple of years, you would start to develop qualifications within that area. So that could be, being an electrician or being a mechanic or something like that. But the good thing is that whatever that qualification is you get, even through that avenue, it's something, if you wanted to come back into kind of more formal education at college, then you could use that and build that onto the next phase if they wanted to go further. So here I've talked about apprenticeships here. So further education, when we talk about further education, we're talking about the college sector. So when you go to college, you can do vocational courses, but then you can also do what's nationally recognized as, there's the national certificate course, then you can do a higher national certificate course, and you can also do a higher national diploma. The NC lasts a year, the HNC lasts 1 year, and then the HND would last another year. Quite a lot of young people who've not quite got the grades that they wanted, let's say if they did want to go to uni within school, can go to college and do the HNC or the HND. And what happens is if you've achieved a HND, for a lot of degrees, you go straight into second year, into direct entry into uni. So you might not lose necessarily a year or whatever. So that's also a really good route. So one thing I'm always saying to young people at that stage is, don't worry if you don't get the grades that you absolutely needed, because we are so lucky that we do have a lot of options. And there are lots of different ways you can get there. It might be a little, like, windy and bendy and a bit of a hassle, but you can get there. As long as you go back and you put that work in, doors don't shut like that. So it's really important to keep going and be positive, even if you're disappointed slightly, with what you got. Then, of course, you've got the higher education route where we do all our undergraduate degrees. So degrees in Scotland, the basic undergraduate degree in Scotland is 4 years. It's 3 years in England because of the difference between the A levels being 2 years and the higher being 1 year. So if you do go to uni in England, it's 3 years. Here it's 4 years. And then after that is what we call postgraduate. So you could be doing a master's, you could do a postgraduate diploma, then a master's. And if you're really keen, then you can go on and do your PhD and become a doctor in your specified area of interest. So that's kind of where we're going. And I know for a lot of people, like I think the person, Leanne, who said their child is starting in primary one, this is a distant goal, but there you go. That's what the system is at the moment. And of course, university education for us in Scotland is still free. And that's a hugely, hugely massive thing, I feel, compared to anywhere else in the country. So we do still have that advantage. I think you get either the first 5 or the first 6 years of education beyond school for free. So, or up to your kind of undergraduate. So for master's level and beyond, you tend to have to pay. There are some courses that are funded by government. So teaching, for example, as a postgraduate course is fully funded. So you don't have to pay for that. Other things you do have to pay for. But again, there's options and help available for that. But it's nothing like paying £9,000 a year that it is down south. That's me pretty much, Leanne. So any other questions, any feedback as well is welcome on, did you find that useful? Has it cleared some myths for you? Are things a bit clearer? Do you feel a bit better?
Yeah, so there's nothing else submitted so far. So I'll give you all a wee second or two, because last call, because we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. But yeah, no, thank you very much, Nushat, for that. It's always good to hear it again. And like you say, because even my daughter is now in S5 and it has changed since then. It's definitely changed since I went to school. And so I think particularly that senior phase, we'll maybe look to get, although we have done quite a few with a variety of different teachers and people from education services. But I think when you get to that senior phase, it does get really complicated. Particularly around those national levels, and if you've grew up like me with standard grades, it's quite hard to follow. So yeah, I don't see any questions coming in just now, so to me that's always a good sign. It means that you are nice and clear in what you've presented.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, can we score ourselves again and see, has that helped any, just in the chat there?
Sure. So while you are looking at the roadmap, and remember your scores 1 to 4 from the beginning of the call to now, we do have a comment and a question. So the comment says that things have changed since I was in school. So how can we help with how can we help with homework? All right, okay, so it's a question, yeah, a couple of questions. So things have changed since I was at school. So how can we help with homework if the teaching is now changed? And I know I've struggled with that myself, particularly with maths. It's done quite differently.
Yeah, maths is definitely the big one, I think. I would suggest that you do ask your school and to send you examples. And a lot of the schools do put things online now as well, whether it's through your child's kind of Google Classroom or whatever other platform they're using, where the kind of methods are there as well. And I think, unfortunately, it is a matter of having to kind of go through that, but go through it together, but otherwise there's obviously lots of other help out there online for various things and how things are done. But I think I think it's very difficult to be specific to help your child to specifically know all the techniques that might be being used at the moment. I think for me, a lot of it is about being engaged and having regular conversations and talking a lot about real life context within certain things. Sometimes it's not just the technique of a particular calculation, but a lot of it is that understanding of number and that understanding of, you know, how this connects to that. And I think as parents, because you can't be expected to be the teacher as well, and, you know, continuously teaching the approaches, that should be obviously for us within school. But what your role, I suppose, is to support as best as you can. And if it means that you're building other skills around that specific technique, then I think that's important too. But ultimately, you can go back to the school and say, look, can you show me or send me something that gives me an example of how this is taught? You have the right to ask for that.
Okay, so a couple more questions. If my child in P4 isn't on track, what can be put in place?
So you'll need to find out, of course, what they're not on track with. So your child can't be fully off track in general for everything, right? So you need to find out what the specific areas are. So for example, in maths, if they're not on track because they're not getting a grasp of the 4 operations, right? The adding, subtracting, division, multiplication. What you're doing there is, you know, it should be kind of part of daily routine, I would say, for your child, if they can manage that, where you're regularly having, you know, bits of practice. You know, you're going over it when you're counting in the car or you're at the shops. It's about, again, it's that type of support that's more important. If it's things within literacy, then the best thing about literacy, and I think maybe you'll agree, you know, we are not reading as much as we used to, and our children absolutely do not write as much as we used to, even just a few years ago. I would really highly recommend that children should be writing. Doesn't matter what their handwriting is like, it doesn't matter how much they write, but they need to write regularly. So a lot of the times I say in like kind of parents meetings is things like, get them to write a daily diary 10 minutes before bed. How was your day? What was the good thing? What did you not enjoy? What you're looking forward to tomorrow? Nobody reads it. Nobody needs to read it. Nobody needs to correct it. It's just for them to write it. And we need to get our kids back to doing a lot more of that and composing that kind of things. Have books, you know, reading is so important, even if it's picture books in the early years, especially, but talk about it and generate those ideas. It's these kind of foundational things that are, I think, really the most important thing about supporting. And these things develop a lot of skills. So you might find that if you have an increased engagement in this kind of thing, you might see that actually they're starting to build up that kind of ability to be on track. But if there's really specific things, then your teachers would be able to tell you, and then you go away. And again, if you think, well, how am I supposed to help in that particular area? Tell your teacher to give you stuff or to point you in the right direction. It could be YouTube videos that you sit and you watch together and you practice things. And there's loads of resources online in various places, but your school and your teacher is the best place to start.
Okay, great. And another question, which will be particularly interesting to you, because I know some topics that you're interested in. Is diversity and inclusion taught to children at any stage in primary and secondary?
So diversity and inclusion, of course, is not a separate subject or any form of equality. What should be happening is, for example, an example of diversity, let's say in nursery, would be to have, and you have like a dress up corner, then you should have clothes of different cultures, right? It shouldn't just be princess dresses, let's say, right? It should be, you know, traditional clothes from maybe African countries, maybe a Chinese dress, you know, saris and, you know, kind of traditional clothes I might wear. So that starts there. And I'll give you another really interesting fact as well, is you might have come across them now. Crayola, the crayon company, only a few years ago made their first set of skin tone crayons. So if you imagine when I was growing up and I drew myself, I could never draw myself because there were never appropriate pencils or crayons in the right color. And it's crazy to me to think that it's 140 years old or something, Crayola, and they've now thought that actually maybe we should have better representation. Things like that, that should be core in every school, these kind of resources that allow children to represent themselves and their families. But again, like I was giving examples of books. So it's not about teaching separately, even though we do have outcomes like the social study ones, and there's also ones in health and well-being that talk about valuing each other's unique differences and things like that. So it is embedded across what we do. In practice, it's not always that easy. In practice, you have to tell schools, do you have representation for different things? Do you have those crayons? Do you have books that have children like my child in it? That is still a kind of growing situation at the moment, work in progress, but really it should be across everything you do, and it should be across the events that a school plans as well, and the various role models they use to teach various different things as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd like to echo that as I'm a mother of a mixed race child. She is Nigerian Scottish. But the good thing is that when I used to go into, say, Waterstones when she was 2 or 3, you could barely find a book with a child like her on the cover of it. But quite recently I visited and there is actually a full section. So
Waterstones are very good just now.
Yeah,
they're very good now, like in the main window. I
yeah.
notice it every time I walk past in Silverburn. I think, right, good for you.
So huge difference, but always room for improvement. So
Yes.
that's the last question. We've had a few comments just saying like a great idea about the diary and the writing.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much. It's been really interesting. We've now got a comment in terms of the road where she's saying, I think I'm between 3 and 4 because we always need to leave room for improvement.
Yes. Good. Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
good.
I'm probably now, I'd say like maybe a 3.5 because again, probably still a lot more there, but we do only have.
And plus you're interested more in the secondary sector, of course, like you said. So we need to find someone that can really give us a deep dive into that. I actually do fear though that the change that's going to come about with the reform is going to be hugely complicated initially. So let's wait maybe until that's a bit clearer. Because I think that's going to bring such big changes potentially if we're going to get rid of certain exams, and so there'll be a whole load to kind of get your head around in that sense as well.
Definitely. So you might be presenting something completely different in 5 or 6 years.
Well, exactly, definitely.
Yeah, but thank you very
everyone.
much, Nuzhat, for your time tonight, and for everyone who's tuned in. I hope you've really enjoyed it. Just a wee reminder that tonight is recorded, so if you go away and you think, oh, what was that part again, there will be a recording. We'll send that link out to you. Please feel free to share that far and wide. It will be on our YouTube channel, so you can access it at any point, and we'll send it straight to your inbox. So share it with any parents who weren't able to join tonight as well, and hopefully they will find it just as interesting.
Leanne, can I quickly come back to one question?
Oh,
I'm just looking at the chat. So the one about how should parents handle concerns with regards to diagnosis of ASN and if they're concerned about where the child is? So ultimately, obviously, your first point of call is your school, and to just make sure that they fully understand the needs. Having an actual diagnosis obviously makes that a little bit easier. But even if you don't have a diagnosis and your child necessarily doesn't have an additional support need, but needs help, needs more support, then, you still have that conversation to say, look, this is my child, this is the issues, what can you put in place to help? How can that work? So they're always the first point of call, and schools will try hard to obviously manage that. But, with the caveat that we're under huge pressures and needs are really growing. And that was one of the big arguments, obviously, that we've been making over the last few months is we need more teachers, we need more specialists, we need potentially smaller class sizes to try and be able to spend that bit more time with each child and focus on those needs. So it's very complicated in that sense. But your school management and your teacher is always the first point of call. But other than that, I would say obviously groups like yourself, Leanne, there'll be groups out there that, maybe have, let's say, specifically children with autism or specifically children with another learning difficulty or a disability. So I would say reach out and network and try and learn from each other and what kind of things are working for some people, they might work for you as well. So I think there is a lot of support out there, but sometimes it's just hard to try and find it. But keep coming to things like this, because you'll pick something up that will point you in the direction to something else as well. But ultimately, be engaged. And one thing I have to say before we finish is be on your parent council. It's so important. So just to, again, for any myths there, the parent council is required in a school by law. We have to have a parent council. That means that there are groups of parents who sit with the school management regularly throughout the year, and they help with the planning of what is going on in the school. The management have to share, things like who they're hiring, and you can be involved in the hiring process of certain posts. But it sets the direction of where your school is going. So you need to be a voice at that table. And especially if you have a child or young person that has certain needs or challenges, it's so important that you are part of that conversation. So my big request is please join the parent council. You don't have to go to every single meeting, but go and have your voice heard.